Hello and welcome along to another episode of My Football Story from the Honest Football Podcast. This week, Charlie catches up with Kings Lynn defender Rory McAuley to discuss his career and journey in football. Starting as a youth player in the well-famed Norwich City Academy, Rory then moved on and forged a career for himself in the National League with Cambridge United. After a highly successful stint there, we talk about the negatives of injuries that may have cost him towards the end of that spell, before rebuilding his career in the National League North and South, and the big move to Kings Lynn, his current club, which has led to a sustained period of success. Rory's been involved in back-to-back promotions for Kings Lynn as they've made their way up to the National League, and Rory talks to us a bit about the behind the scenes and the atmosphere in the dressing room, which can lead to that momentum and a club coming through the divisions. It's a fascinating insight, and we can't thank Rory enough for sharing his time and being so honest with us. If you do enjoy the episode, please don't forget to put a thumbs up on it. Subscribe down below for regular content, including more interviews like these from the Honest Football Podcast, and you can follow us over on Twitter to stay up to date at HonestFootball3. But this is Rory McAuley's football story, and we hope you enjoy it.
I'm delighted to say Rory's joining us now. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's a Wednesday morning, sorry. So, obviously lots of stuff going on and things like that. But I appreciate you taking the time to join us today, Rory.
No problem, mate. Looking forward to it.
So what we do is, you've played professionally, you've played for your country and done all sorts of amazing things in your career. But what we do with every player that we speak to, regardless of where they played and who they played with, is we want to always go back to that first memory of football. So just sort of take us back, whether it was, as a kid, playing football, watching a game on TV at a stadium. What's your first ever memory of the game, really?
My first memory is actually, I think it was the Brian Gunn testimonial for Norwich City. I remember I went to the game and it was against Man United. And I just remember seeing Eric Cantona play, and that's my probably first memory. I think that was 96 or something like that. So yeah, it's quite a good one, quite a good first game to go to, see Eric Cantona.
Well, yeah, obviously, I suppose, I imagine, would that have been after he'd done the Kung Fu kick or just before? I suppose there's quite a lot of controversy around him then, wasn't there?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you if it was before or after, but yeah, I've definitely seen that since as well, yeah.
In that sense, then, sort of playing, do you remember much? Was it a lot of like playing out in the garden, and then you got, end up sort of just playing for a local team? How'd that sort of work in that sense?
Yeah, so I started off basically. My mum's partner at the time, he played local Sunday football, and he took me to a team called Wendine Wanderers in Norwich. So I started playing off there, and I then soon joined like the sort of the better Sunday league team around the area, Helsden, and went on into the academy and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a good start, Sunday league, grassroots, and sort of built on that.
Yeah, the thing is, I think Norwich is such a hotbed for football. The amount of players that have come through from not just Norwich, that sort of surrounding area. It's incredible, really. Like you say, I suppose the standard must have been quite high when you were playing, even as a child in that sense, local football.
Well, yeah, definitely, because Norwich is so far away from anywhere else. All the best players, Norwich have got the pool, so all the best players, all the young players from around this area all go to Norwich. They're sort of highest ranked club around here, and there's not another big club for 2 hours away.
Yeah. So I suppose in that sense then of playing at school, obviously you went on to play professionally, but what we always like to find out is whether you were that much better than everyone else at school, or, because for some players it's a slightly slower journey, isn't it? And maybe once you get towards the end of high school, it starts to kick in a bit more. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly that. I think I was a good Sunday league player at my age, but once I joined the academy, I had a lot of catching up to do. I sort of did most of my developing through the youth team. I always felt I was playing a bit of catch up. I went physically. I didn't like shoot up until I've left school and stuff like that. So I did most of my developing once I was in the youth team.
So in terms of that, obviously, how did that sort of come about? Were you just playing sort of local football and then happened to be a scout, or, because some clubs have like, things during half terms or stuff like that? How did it work?
Well, it's a funny one, really, because I was on the sort of books of the Norwich and stuff in the PDC, and I actually entered a competition on, I don't know if you remember a channel called Fox Kids TV.
Yeah.
There's a national competition, and it started off in the Asda car park in Norwich, and Brian Gunn picked like the best two that could do the keepy ups in that. And I ended up getting down from about, I think it was 16,000 kids to like the last 10 in the whole country. I was off at Tottenham doing trial stuff down there for that. And the winners of this kids tournament got to go and represent England in Spain. And I just missed out in the finals in Manchester. But they took me and my mum down there, put us up in a 5-star hotel and that made it onto the telly. And then I think Norwich caught wind of it and took me down and signed me after that.
Do you remember who the kid in the final was? Did they go on to big things or not?
Name of the kids, I was too distraught because I got down to like the last few kids or whatever, and I just missed out. I just remember crying on the way home.
Obviously, that's sort of like you mentioned about Norwich and, obviously the area that it covers and stuff like that. But you know, it's obviously not easy getting into an academy. How did you find that, maybe going from, I suppose, not playing for fun with your Sunday league, but, you know, the sort of difference is it's a bit more serious, isn't it? Because you're trying to make a career maybe out of it a bit more then when you get to that stage.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely more of a pressure that come with it. But I just remember buzzing just because I was playing for Norwich, and I'd be going to school and I'd have Arsenal at the weekend and Tottenham and Chelsea, and everyone would be asking me what the scores was and stuff like that. And it was just a real pride. So when I actually got released from Norwich, I was also devastated then as well.
Yeah, of course. I think it's so tough, isn't it? That it's, well, as you know better than me, obviously, it's quite a cutthroat sort of industry. Were you always a defender you know, obviously you made a career as a defender after that, but when you were at like teams like Norwich and stuff, or were you sort of moved around a bit?
I was actually a central midfield player. I was centre mid for most of my career. Through the youth team, I was a centre mid player. And then I made my debut for Cambridge United first team as a right back when there was an injury crisis. And it weren't until I was about 21 that I actually started playing centre back. And once I started playing centre back, within like, I think a month or two, I got called up to the England C team as a centre back. So I was quite late to my position, really. I still played when I first broke in. I made my debut at right back, but I played about 30, 40 games in the conference as a centre midfield player, box to box. But my attributes are probably best suited as a centre back, and I'm not blessed with pace. So I read the game a bit better at the back.
We'll sort of go back a bit then. You mentioned obviously that period between, you know, unfortunately the being released at Norwich, but then signing for Cambridge. Was there anything happened in between that? Was there maybe other places you could have gone, or how did that sort of work?
Well, how it worked was I got released from Norwich. Cambridge City come in and said we want to take you on trial, or we want to sign you, or whatever. And within about 2 or 3 weeks of actually being released from Norwich, I was playing against them at Colney. Right. So that was good. And then so the Cambridge City youth team set up at the time. Cambridge United had financial issues, and the youth teams and youth set up had dispersed. The Cambridge City youth set up was then going to transfer to the Cambridge United one. So that's where I was going to get a scholarship. And the guy in charge at the time, Jed George, actually, even though he knew me, he said, "We're not sure if we're going to give you a scholarship, so I want you to come in on trial for your scholarship." So all the other lads that were at Cambridge City had their scholarships, and I had to come in with other lads that had been at other clubs and do the trial. I remember we had a family holiday booked, 16, and they all went off on holiday, and I had to stay at home on my own so I could do this trial. And in the end, at the end of the trial, I got the okay, I got the scholarship, and sort of kicked on from there, really.
Yeah. So how did you find that in terms of a scholarship? Because I suppose from the outside, it's maybe at the weekend you're playing as part of a team, but then you are trying to eventually, I suppose, compete for the few contracts that might be available at the end of that. Because obviously you're not all going to get taken on, are you? So how does that sort of work in terms of that mindset of throughout the week?
To be honest with you, I thrived in it. I loved the scholarship and the living in the digs with all the other lads. Moved to Cambridge, lived there, and did it. The competitiveness, and I just really thrived and developed. I come such a long way in them 2-3 years. If I didn't have that, if I maybe like the way they work at some other clubs when you stay at home and travel in, or you live separately from the other lads, I'm glad I had it where we was all together in that situation, sort of competing, but it's a healthy competition, and it really got the best out of me.
How did you find that transition of, if you know what I'm saying, from the outside again, like, I suppose youth football, we get the impression it's maybe, you know, a bit more technical, that kind of thing. But then you get into the senior sort of ranks, and even just in training before you make your first sort of debut, is it a lot more physical? Is it a lot quicker than, you know, what it is when you're playing youth football, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I didn't go straight into getting my professional contract. What happened was, at the end of my scholarship, the Cambridge United manager at the time, Jimmy Quinn, he offered one pro contract out, and that wasn't to me. So I got released at the end. Youth setup didn't agree with what was going on, and that only one player got the pro. So what they said was, we're going to do with me and two other lads, we're going to give you a third year scholarship, which is away from with the first team. But within 3 months of them telling me no, the first team manager telling me no, he got sacked. The new season started. There was an injury, and I made my debut. So I went from being released to making my first team debut in 3 months. But yeah, going back to the quality in that, I'd say, yeah, there's definitely, because when you're at the club like Cambridge United, you get all the pros filtering down. You had like Courtney Pitt that had been at Chelsea, Rob Wollaston that had been at Chelsea, Paul Carden, Football League players. So there's a real quality of player there. The tempo was just a lot faster than the youth team. And you're still at 18, 19, you're still not physically fully developed. So it's a learning curve, to say the least, yeah.
So in terms of that, obviously you mentioned about sort of making your debut. Just aside from you personally at that time, I suppose there was quite a lot going on at Cambridge anyway, wasn't there? You know, there was talks of a new stadium.
Yeah.
all that kind of thing. What's that environment like to be in once you'd obviously maybe establish yourself a little bit more as a player? Because there's so much off the pitch sort of stuff going on, wasn't there?
It's the first team environment. I think I sort of caught the back end of the last sort of old school sort of players as well. So it's quite harsh, really, in terms of if you had any weaknesses, you'd get picked out on them. Do you know what I mean? It was a tough school, but the club was really good, and it was like it's one of the biggest clubs in the league at the time. It was. So I sort of was a bit blind to the other side. I was so focused on playing football and trying to get in the first team and show what I could do.
Yeah, no, I think it's. I appreciate being so honest about that in that sense. So obviously, Cambridge at the time were in the conference, the various different names it's had over the years in that sense. But it's probably easy just to call it that. In terms of before each game, as you grew into the squad, do you get less nervous? What's your sort of mindset before each game, or is it still the same from say the first game to even now in your career, if that makes sense?
From now, even now, from when I was young, every game I play, I feel like I've got something to prove. I've got pride that when I play, I can't have a bad performance. I've got to go out and show that I'm good enough to play at this level. Maybe that's been a little bit of a flaw of mine. It really hurts me if I don't perform. I feel like I've been a letdown to the rest of my teammates. So that's what drives me each game, is to just prove that I'm capable of doing it.
Yeah. Do you think, if you don't mind me asking a slightly personal question, do you think that comes from maybe, because you get some pros who've been at a club and they get all the way through and they don't necessarily have that rejection of, being released, or like you had that sort of instability of knowing whether you had a pro contract or not and all of that sort of thing. Do you think that helps fuel that a little bit?
I think you're right. I think it does, because every time someone told me no, I was like so determined to prove them wrong. That just drove me on, and I think that's just something that I've kept with me through all my playing career, just to show that I'm good enough all the time, to sort of prove myself.
It's fascinating because I think we don't see that from say we as the fans, but sometimes you're hammering the left back for giving the ball away or something like that. Not saying we have to take into account their journey, but we probably don't see the other side of it, like you mentioned about so and so you had a few rejections, so this means so much to you and all that kind of stuff. So I think doing these interviews, I probably realised that actually there's a lot more to being a pro footballer than what it is just on the pitch on a Saturday at 3:00, isn't there? In that sense.
No, definitely. Like when the fans come to games and that, you see everything from the outside. You don't know the person individually. You don't know what's going on in their life at that moment. All sorts of different things can affect that person, how they react to different situations, how they're performing. But most people just see everything from the outside. And me, even as a teammate to other teammates, I could probably be a bit harsh sometimes on people or stuff like that. And you don't really know what's going on in people's lives or what they've had to deal with. So you should probably spare a thought sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. How do you, look back on your time at Cambridge? Obviously, I mean, in terms of I doing a bit of research, the whole thing, at one point, Martin Ling was then manager, then he resigned, then he was manager, all that sort of thing. But for you personally, as a player, initially, how do you view your sort of time at Cambridge?
I really enjoyed it. I was like proper in love with the club. Like I was a sort of fan's favourite because I come through the youth system, and I've always played with my heart on my sleeve. So the fans sort of took to me, and I've sort of, in a way, when I was there, I could do no wrong really. I went on to like captain the side for a while and stuff like that. So I got nothing but fond memories of the place. It was really good.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on before we sort of move on about you. But I know at one point, Nick Pope actually was on loan, wasn't he, at Cambridge with you?
Yeah.
I know obviously he was a lot younger then, but when you're playing with players like that, would you have known and expected him to go on to where he is now?
Yeah, he was good. He come in on loan, I think it was from Charlton at the time, and he was there for about 10 games. I don't think we lost one of them games. I actually travelled. I used to meet him. I think he's from Bury, where I used to meet him on the way to training and share the car. And I remember, I think on the first Friday it was when he was there before the game, we got a McDonald's on the way home from training, and we won the next day. So we said, well, I'm going to have to get that like before every game. And we went 10 games without losing a game. So every Friday for them 10 games, we had a McDonald's.
It's not the worst excuse for having one, is it really? So obviously in terms of that, McDonald's aside, obviously at Cambridge, it was a successful time for you, but eventually, that had to sort of come to an end. If you don't want me talking a slightly sort of negative thing, was it hard to leave? Yeah. And how did that come about? Because you actually started the season, obviously, when they had that massive year of getting promoted. So how did that sort of all work, really?
It was really tough that season, because at that point, I'd the season before, I just got a new 2-year contract. I was one of the main players and started that season. And I think 2 or 3 games in, I've rolled my ankle against Aldershot away. I remember it clear as day. And I was out for about weeks, and the team was just an unbelievable form. I think that year was the last team in the UK to lose a game, and I'd come back from injury and just couldn't get in the side, couldn't get nowhere near it. The centre halves were flying, and went on that season to win the FA Trophy at Wembley and win the playoff final at Wembley. And I didn't feature in either of them. And it really did hurt me, to be honest with you, because I'd gone from being like captain the season 4 as well, one of the main players, to not even be able to get in the side. I ended up going out on loan to Chelmsford for a month, Dartford for a month. Yeah, and it was a real tough mental season for me, that handling the fact that I just couldn't get anywhere near the team when I come back from injury.
Yeah, it's the only sort of negatives we'll talk about today, but just a couple of things on that. In terms of being injured, it's the only thing we as fans can relate to someone who's played professionally is being injured. And whether, for someone like me who can't play grassroots football, although it's not my job, it's still an important part of my life. So I always want to know from sort of a pro perspective, how do you find the rehab? Because when the lads are out training, you're having to do your own rehab. How hard is that?
Well, I fully agree with you. It's mind-numbing stuff, and it doesn't really feel like you're getting anywhere when you're doing it. Because when you go out and you do a run or you do a training session, you come off and you're physically shattered, you're mentally shattered after a game. Whereas when you have to turn up to training with all the other boys, watch them go out, put their boots on, do what they love doing, and then play on a Saturday, and you go off into a little box room somewhere and are on a balancing pad and different bands around your knees and stuff like that, not doing squats that don't really feel like getting you anywhere. It's a bit soul destroying when you're just basically there watching everyone do what you want to do, but you can't do it.
Yeah, no, as I say, it's probably one of the few things that, we can relate to in terms of the career you've had. But I noticed obviously throughout your career, a lot of the clubs have been in the east of England and, in terms of that sort of surrounding area. And it's it's a really important point that we don't understand necessarily as fans, but how important is the locality of a club? Because I suppose we just look at, here's team A in this league, here's team B here, but actually, how important is that kind of stuff to you?
Well, the reality of it is that the clubs around your area and the level that we're playing at, you only earn a certain amount of money playing for these clubs. So the location's massive because you've got responsibilities at home. So you're going to stay as close to home as you can, unless the contract they offer outweighs the responsibilities and you have to move away from home. So when you've got a young family, you want to be as close to home as you can, because you're not getting mega rich off playing at this level. Do you know what I mean? You're earning a living to get by. So then if you take into consideration having to move away, the rental costs, the petrol, all of that sort of stuff, you're probably worse off playing for a team further away that might be slightly higher up the league table.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I really appreciate you being honest about that, because I think we are quite naive sometimes and look at just, the footballing perspective.
Yeah. What I will say with that is when you're a young lad, that's absolutely fine. You'd go anywhere up and down the country, you'd travel because you're trying to further your career. Once you get to a certain age and you've got your kids, you've got your mortgage, you've got everything going on, then that's when the sort of location becomes more important.
Yeah, no, thank you for talking to us about that. Genuinely, it's fascinating to hear that side of it. You obviously then, you moved to Dartford, who you'd been on loan at previously. What sort of options did you have at that point? And was it maybe the familiarity of being a club you'd already known that maybe swayed you? How did that work?
That was definitely that. I'd gone to Dartford on loan for 16 games that season and won one of their Player of the Year awards. I don't know if they just give me that to try and get me to sign the next season.
No, I'm sure not. No.
So I went there, and they've got a lovely setup at Dartford. They had a sort of reasonably new stadium, all enclosed, and that plays a massive part for me because when I was a kid, I always wanted to play in nice football stadiums. I wanted to play where there's the most fans, the name on the back of the shirt, all of that sort of stuff. And it was a lovely setup. So that's what drew me there. And I'd already been there. I knew the people. I did have a couple of other offers on the table, but that was the one that really drew me in.
How do you sort of look back on that at Dartford? Because I suppose necessarily on the pitch didn't quite go the way you'd have liked, but on a personal level as well.
That was another thing. It was at the time the Dartford crossing didn't have all the electronic stuff as well. So we used to get to there and it'd take about 3 hours from Norwich to get to training. And then we'd train for 2 hours and then I'd drive 3 hours back. So I was doing a 6-hour round journey for a 2-hour training session. And I was doing that 3 or 4 times a week. So it took its toll over the year. Obviously we struggled. So that mentally didn't help, but it was a good experience. The people there were good. And yeah, I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, I've got to say that that whole Dartford crossing even now is still a bit of a nightmare, isn't it? It's probably easier now than it was back then. I'm not after sort of personal information or anything like that, but in terms of your time when you mentioned about Dartford then being sort of a bit more of a part-time football, what else are you doing? Because obviously you mentioned about having to support family and home and all that sort of thing. What else were you doing in that sense?
I was quite young. I didn't have any responsibilities. I was living at the time with my missus, who I'm still with now, and I was living at her dad's with her. So I literally just was trying to focus on football and getting back into the professional game. As it's gone on, that's now changed. So now I I do property management with a mate of mine now. Me and another friend have got a street food business, which we started in the middle of last lockdown, which has gone really well, better than expected. It's obviously not much going on right now, but we're going to kick on again in the summer. So there's a few things that I've picked up since.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're like because not just me who does the podcast. There's a few of us on here, and we're all massive foodies. I was gonna get onto the street food bit later on, but moving to sort of Chelmsford, someone of your background and your ability from the outside, it would seem like you definitely could have played higher. But I know there's obviously, as we've spoken about, maybe other stuff that goes on. So how much was sort of in that move, if that makes sense?
If I'm honest with you, I was about to sign for the Cowley brothers at Braintree. I'd come back from a holiday. I went down to sign for them, had the meeting with them, did a training session, got injured. And they just said, "Oh, we're gonna hold off till you're fully fit again before we sign anything." And at the time, I needed to get whatever I was getting done sorted. Chelmsford's come in. They got a phone call from Chelmsford, who was the league bloke, because I think Braintree were in the Conference Prem at the time. I think they finished in the playoffs that season, so that was a bad move. And I knew the guy from Chelmsford, so I decided to go there because there was no guarantee for me holding out that the Braintree might turn around and say, "Look, we'll sign someone else now." So, and in non-league football, you don't know where your next deal's coming from sometimes. So I thought I'd play it safe and sign there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've spoken to a few players who've been, different levels of the pyramid. And like you say, I think you touched on something so important there that, we probably don't, that's why it's fascinating to have these conversations, is I don't want to say instability, but in non-league football, I suppose it is that, where's the next coming from? It's not, we get so overwhelmed with the Premier League and so signs a 5-year deal and all that. Obviously, you haven't got that security, have you, at that level?
No, not at all. And it's a case as well, especially in non-league, when you haven't got a club going into the start of pre-season, because the longer pre-season goes on, the more the clubs have got their squads, got their budgets, not much money left. So if you're signing a deal at the end of pre-season when the season starts, you're going to get offered less money than what you would at the start. So it's better to have all your things set up and in place for pre-season, and then you just play through the pre-season and start the season. If you leave it last minute, you're going to end up in a bit of a pickle, I think.
Yeah. So in terms of that, obviously you mentioned about sort of being at Chelmsford. When do you start, and not on about necessarily Chelmsford in general, but even just playing sort of non-league or lower league football, at what point in the season do you start looking and thinking, right, I either need to, can I get another deal here, or do I need to look elsewhere? And I'm not just saying about Chelmsford in general, but just like as a pro footballer at that level.
It really depends on the club. If you're doing really well, you can, Christmas time, you can go and knock on the door and say, "Look, I want to secure my future for next year. I've got financial responsibilities." But it really is in the hands of the club. They can turn around and just say, "We're going to do it at the end of the season." So a lot of players, most players, I'd probably say, finish the season and not know what they're going to be doing next year. It's literally in the hands of the club. So yeah, it's, as I said, if you're doing really well, you can go and ask, but you've got to be careful as well, because you might get an answer you're not looking for.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, if you, at the sort of clubs you're talking about there, how much of players, not necessarily you, but even players you played with, are their performance affected by that? Do people become a little bit more selfish? Not necessarily, but you're trying to show up the other centre half almost, so you've got a better chance of getting the deal, or do you know what I'm getting at in that sense?
It really is. Football's really is a look after number one industry. You want to play well for your team and that, but none of your teammates are going to pay your bills in non-league. Do you know what I mean? It's different the higher up you get, because you're sort of financially stable. Doesn't matter if you're not playing. Doesn't matter if they release you, because you'll get another club and you'll still earn good money. In non-league, it literally is playing to pay your bills and to survive. Obviously, to be a good player, especially for someone like me, I've got to be a good team player. But at the end of the day, no one else is going to look after you. So you have to make sure that you're all right. So
in terms of that, obviously you mentioned about looking after yourself. That sort of time at Chelmsford, how was that experience for you? And also, how did that then lead to the move to Lowestoft off the back of that? Again, someone of your sort of quality, really.
Again, I really enjoyed Chelmsford. Had a really good season there. Won one of the Player of the Year awards there that season. And I'd actually agreed to sign again. Rod String had just come in. I agreed to sign another year contract for the next season. I know Lowestoft had tried to sign me in January. I think they'd offered Chelmsford a few quid in January to sign me, which the club had turned down. And then at the end of that season, Lowestoft come in and they really wanted me. They had a couple of phone calls with me. I said no, to be honest with you. I was going to stay because it was a high league. I wanted to stay at Chelmsford. And then my little girl was due to be born a few months later. And if I'm honest, Lowestoft come in on a 3-year contract. With my little girl just about to be born, I chose the security of that rather than the year at Chelmsford.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It makes complete sense. I think if you took those scenarios and put it in any other industry, anyone would say, you're going to take that deal, aren't you, to support your family and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
for some reason, football, we seem to skewer it a little bit and put the football in
yeah.
front of those sort of things sometimes, don't we? But what we're going to do before we move on to, where you are now in terms of Kings Lynn, I mean, we could probably do a whole episode on that in terms of the journey that Kings Lynn have been on, which we'll talk about in a minute. I just wanted to part that to the side and go on about international football. So you alluded to it earlier on at the beginning of the episode about playing for England C. Where does that sort of rank for you, given what you achieved as a player domestically?
Yeah, it's brilliant, really. Look, I understand where I am in the scale of things. So I've had a career in football. I never made it to the top, but I'm still really proud with everything that I've done. I've made it into a small percentage of people that managed to do it. But the England C one was special for me because it flew out to Moscow, played against Russia under 21s, flew out to Albania, played against their under 20. Well, actually, we didn't play because it got called off just before the game Warlock pitch. And flew out to Gibraltar, played against them. You treat like a sort of Premier League player, but just standing there with the England shirt on and the national anthem playing, I don't care if it's England C. That felt amazing to me. So,
yeah. Did you notice, if you don't mind me asking, did you notice a difference in the style of football? Not necessarily standard, but because we from the outside had this perception of European football. It's a lot slower, a lot more technical. Obviously, you played against other teams, so how did that sort of work?
well, to be honest with you, when we played the Russia under 21s, they were another level to us. So they had a striker. I can't remember what his name was, but they had a striker that Real Madrid had bought for 9 million. Lost 4-0 against them, and he scored 3 of them, I think. But yeah, they was very good. They was very technical. The thing I found with the referees is the game's refed differently. Like there's not as much contact as the English game. As soon as you show your studs, it's a foul, whether you're near a player or not, which doesn't suit my style of play.
You sort of mentioned, just as an example, like that lad you mentioned who played for Russia, just obviously, you've played at the top level. What separates someone like him from, and like you mentioned earlier, anyone who plays professionally is an outstanding footballer, regardless of how you want to dress it up. But what separates someone like him from the rest of you, for the want of a better phrase?
It's hard to say. I'd say, especially for like someone that's under 21, I think the young ones that sort of go on quicker are the ones that understand the game more at an early age, or are more physically developed at an early age. But I think it's just the quickness you do thing. I think if you go down the leagues, there's obviously a jump in quality, but I think it's the speed at which things are done, which is the real difference. So lower down, it's touch, pass. Like the higher up, it'll be touch, pass. Everything's just quicker. So I'd say that's probably what I feel is the main difference.
No, and it's fascinating to hear that side of it. You're one of the few people we've actually spoken to who's played international football, so I appreciate you sort of talking about that. Obviously, you mentioned at Lowestoft. How and why did you end up sort of leaving there to go to Kings Lynn in the sort of environment you did?
I was at Lowestoft. It weren't a great time there. I wasn't mentally in the right place. I'd had a tragedy go on in my life, which affected me massively. And I was on holiday with the missus and kids, and I had a phone call from Simon Clark at Kings Lynn. They'd been up at the top of the league. I think they just missed out on promotion the season before, and I just needed a change. I needed something to get me motivated. I just needed a change in my life, and I'm really glad I did it. It was one of the best decisions I've made, actually. And being at Kings Lynn is probably the best time I've had out my whole football career. Yeah,
well, you can see that. I think quite early on into your time there, I think it was like 2 overhead kicks in 2 weeks. Especially in the league in terms of a centre half, you don't always get that reputation. But in terms of that journey, particularly the first sort of season or two, what made that sort of side so special? Because obviously the promotions that you've had, I know you've got Ian Culverhouse in charge, and he's obviously a massive name, but there's got to be other factors to it as well.
The lads are just unbelievable. The captain, Michael Cloonan's unbelievable captain. You've got players like Ryan Jarvis that have been around the leagues and stuff like that. And it was just a real team effort, the 2 promotions and stuff like that. It was just all the boys in it together. There weren't no one player that did it. It was a combination of all of us. They might have Adam Marriott sticking the ball in the back of the net, but it was the team that got it there. It was. So I mean, it's the way we played football, the style of football we played was just so enjoyable. Them 2 seasons, it was just riding a high the whole time.
Yeah, I don't know, from your side, from the outside, it seems like everyone's pulling in the same direction. I think sometimes, obviously, you need to have the ability and talent, but I think that unity can carry you so far in football as well, can't it? If everyone sort of is going in the right sort of, if everyone's pulling in the same sort of direction in that sense.
And there was real quality in our team as well. There still is. We didn't just go in. We didn't win both the promotions like by winning games 1-0 and stuff like that. we outplayed most teams we played. We was the better side and deserved it. We didn't scrape 1-0s. We didn't do all that sort of stuff. We went and played football and got promoted playing football, and that's the most pleasing thing about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that really quickly. Obviously, I don't know how much notice you take of the media and stuff when they're talking about you, but people have written Kingsling off in the last 2 years, haven't they, really? Do you and the sort of management and the squad use that as a fuel, or do you just ignore it? How does that sort of impact you?
It's not something that we talk about as a team, but obviously players hear and see different things. And for me personally, I won't talk for everyone else. Me personally, it's a game same as earlier in my career. I just want to prove people wrong. If they're going to write us off, I'll show them. That's the sort of attitude I've got towards it. And I love being the underdog. There's nothing better than being an underdog when you're going into a game, because the worst you can do is what everyone thinks you're going to do, lose. So when you win, it makes it even better.
It's fascinating. I really hadn't sort of framed it that way. It's an incredible mindset, that actually, when you sort of word it like that. Just on that, obviously, you end up in the Conference North. So we do I've got to tell you a very quick backstory. We do like a prediction show each year for all the leagues from the Championship down to the Conference South and North. And one of the things I said about was teams like you and Brackley was actually being so far south. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage? So for you, obviously, I suppose in away games, it can be a bit of a travel, but for home games, is that almost an advantage for you being quite far south in a northern league?
I think it is an advantage for us. I know all our away games are far. Every other week, teams have got to do the dreaded journey to Kings Lynn. They are like the middle of nowhere. So no one, when everyone looks at especially the Conference North sides, when everyone looks at the fixture list, and most people go down Kings Lynn. Who are they? Where is that? Get the map up, and it's 3-4 hour round journey. That's psychologically you've got some teams on the ropes before they even come, and the fans as well, and the stadium. We was a fortress. I think Liverpool was like the only team that went longer than us over that period, so we made it a fortress, and teams definitely like dreaded coming there, and a lot of them were beat before they even got there, I think.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear that, and I think you're right. I think even just playing local football, sometimes going half an hour feels like a long journey. So, like you say, doing 3 or 4 hours at a time is. But in terms of obviously towards the end of the season, with that, it was sort of taken out of your hands then in terms of, for obvious reasons, a global pandemic, which, given everything that you've done at Kings Lynn, must have felt was there a bit of anxiety, because obviously after all you'd achieved, to get that close and then all of that to hit, what was sort of happening in the club at that time when that was all up in the air, really?
It was crazy, really, yeah. No one knew what was going on. So the season had just come to an end. And I think it went on for about 3 months. No one knew. So it would have been devastating if it got null and voided, because we'd done all that hard work. We've done the mileage on the road. We've got ourselves top of the league just for like a few months before the end of the season to be said that you're not going to get promoted. So when we was hanging on for 3 months, all the players were in touch with each other. Like, we was all talking on a daily basis, what's going out, new bit of news would come out, and then we'd start discussing that in the group chat, and we're just left in limbo. But when we got that news through that there was points per game and we'd be promoted, it was unbelievable. It was a great feeling.
Yeah.
After doing what we did that season, for it to get taken away, to then have to start again from scratch would have been tough to try and do it again. So the fact that we got promoted was probably done as a favour. I think that would have been hard to replicate what we'd done in that first season in the Conference North the next year. Yeah.
I think the style of football and the way it was working, you probably would have, from an outsider, like you would have done, because it was such entertaining and refreshing to watch, in that sense. But this season, obviously, it's been a bit disrupted. How have you found that? Because it's always that sort of thing. Is it going to keep going? Is the league going to stop? Is it tough to be playing for a team in the conference at the minute?
It is quite tough, to be fair, because it's nothing consistent, really. You train and you've got the games, then games get called off, trains up, COVID case, miss another game, come into training, or someone's been in contact, someone can't train. It's just been really stop-start. And as a team as well, we've just started to find a level in the middle. We'd either been good or bad. We just started to find a sort of median. It'd be nice just to get a flow of games. And even now, it's meant to be Saturday, Tuesday to the end of the season. But then there's talks of the season finishing. What's going to happen with grants? Is it going to be loans? And it's just, there's so much uncertainty that it's hard to get a consistent level, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially like you mentioned, maybe a team like Kings Lynn, and what you did so well the previous year was that consistency and that momentum, wasn't it? I suppose it is hard to then have a game and then potentially 2 weeks not have one and that kind of stuff. I suppose we don't always see that side of it.
Well, I think we had a game middle of December and then didn't play again until nearly the middle of January. So it's like, that's due to the weather as well. But it's just like, that's a long time to not play. And now we're going into Saturday, Tuesday. So it's been tough. Like, like mentally to sort of get your head around some of it. But yeah, we're giving it a good go and we're doing our best.
In terms of that then for you personally, what's your plans for the future? Would you like to stay involved in the game one way or another? Or, and I'm not asking you to reveal too much, but, just maybe a bit of attention in that sense.
I'm just so in love with the game at the minute, with football and that, but that's just definitely on the playing side at the minute. I know like Ryan Jarvis, he's a coach and I talk to him about coaching stuff. So there might be an avenue for me to get into coaching of some sort. I think I'd make a better number 2 than a manager in the future. But I just so concentrated on playing right now, and that's what I'm going to stick with for now.
What we normally do is we finish with some quick fire questions, which we will do in a minute. But we did mention about obviously, businesses outside of football. So just tell us a little bit more about the street food business that you started obviously in the lockdown, and how people can engage with it in that sense.
Yeah, so we've got, you can get us on our Instagram. It's Wokbox Street Food. But we literally in the first lockdown in the summer, my mate's got a sort of well-known Chinese restaurant in Norwich. And I've always said to him, let's come up with like a pop-up. Let's do something where we get into music festivals, food festivals, stuff like that. We like hummed and hard. And then in the middle of that lockdown, we just sort of said, you know what, let's do it. We bought all the stuff that we needed, made the investment. We come out of that lockdown. We had a few events at the showground, driving cinemas. And then we got into like the biggest street food vendor sort of festival sort of event, so to speak, in Norwich Junkyard. And it just took off so quickly and has gone really well. So he hadn't looked back since. So now we've obviously got into another lockdown. We're just going to be making plans for when we come out the summer and the festival, stuff like that. The plan with it is, because obviously he's got his restaurant, I've got football. If we did a street food thing, it's sort of in our control, then we can pop up where we want. When we've got time, we can do it rather than being locked down to having a shop or a location.
No, that's fascinating, and wish you the best with that. But if you need anyone to test any food or anything, then I'm always available. So no, but
whenever you see us around at an event, pop down, mate. There's a box on the house.
Oh, I appreciate it very, very much. No, it's good to hear. But I've got to be honest, Rory, this has been one of my favourite interviews. I really appreciate you being so honest and talking to us about that. But I sort of said to you before, we won't always ask you the same questions, but we always do have a quick fire round. So you've probably been asked some of these before, but maybe not so. So it's just some quick fire questions. Yeah. The first one is across your whole career, your favourite ever ground you've ever played at?
Probably Bradford, when we played Bradford in the FA Cup, just because it's such a big stadium. And I always remember the Paul Scholes corner to David Beckham's corner, to Paul Scholes on the edge of the box. So it was just good to play in the same stadium that happened.
Sort of moments in history, that, isn't it? This is one we started more recently, because I'm fascinated a bit by, players in their career and your favourite pair of boots. Now, it could not necessarily the most comfortable ones or ones you had the best experience, but across your whole career, what would be the best pair of boots you've had?
As a kid, I was definitely on the Predator vibe. As I've got older, just anything black. Just total black boots, no colour. That's me. If you're a centre-half with yellow boots, you've got to play well.
The next one, if it's divisive, don't feel you have to answer it. But if you could choose a favourite manager across your career, but if it's going to upset people, I don't want you to do that,
I had a doubt Ian Culverhouse. Best manager I've ever had. It's nothing like I've ever had before. And my only regret is that I didn't have him when I was younger, and I'm still developing now, but when I was younger and could have done with someone like him in my career.
This next one, obviously, I imagine you must have been asked it by so many people, but the best player you've played with and the best player you've played against?
Played with probably Andre Gray. Berry, actually, he's at Luton. He's a good player, centre mid. Played against Aaron Ramsey in the FA Youth Cup, or Jamie Vardy, probably. Not bad too.
I was about to say, if you're going to drop some names in there, not too, those ones aren't too bad. And then the last question, Rory, before you go, is originally this series started as just interviewing fans for their favourite of a game that they've watched. But it'd be remiss of me not to ask you about not only the one that you've ever watched, but your favourite game as a player. So we'll give you two. So your favourite of a game that you've played in, but then the one you've watched, you could have been at the ground, you might have watched it on TV or anything like that. But those two favourite games. Yeah,
so favourite one to play in would have been when I scored the winner against Luton at Kenilworth Road. Big rivalry, Cambridge-Luton. We won 1-0. And within a few days of that happening, got called up to England C. So that's probably the best one I've played in. As a fan, I'm going to go with being a young lad watching the 99 Champions League final with Man United scoring the 2 late goals, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Teddy Sheringham. I remember jumping around the front room and I didn't even support Man United.
Do you know what? That game's come up a few times. We've interviewed a few people. That game, but you're the first one, and I feel exactly the same. Like, I have no affiliation to. I don't, I'm a West Ham fan, but that game just got me out of your seat, even regardless of whether you're a United fan or not, didn't it? Really.
I must have been only about 9 or 10, and after the game, I remember just being so buzzing that I've gone outside the front door and I was playing football against the fence. So it's quite inspiring, really.
Rory, honestly, I cannot thank you enough for giving up your time this morning. It's been a genuine pleasure. We wish you all the best, obviously, the rest of the season. But yeah, thanks so much for giving up your time, and we'll keep in contact with you soon.
No, you too, mate. It's been a pleasure.